Hi, my name is Angela Bandurka. I call myself an impressionistic representationalist. What that means is that I paint realistic looking paintings that look rough and hopefully painterly when viewed up close. Acrylic is my very favorite opaque medium. I love its immediacy. You have to be quick with your mixes and application of the paint. In this demo, I've taken a photo that I took while on vacation in Waikiki with my family and cropped in on a sunset that was hidden behind a little cloud cover. The challenge here will be to create the soft effect of warm to cool light in the sky and then the reflections in the water that have some texture in them. Nothing's impossible, so let's get right to it, shall we?
Okay, I'm going to start the drawing by just creating an X grid. I'm going to start it on my reference photo, which is a square, and I need to grab a marker and a ruler. And I'm going to start by drawing a line from corner to corner for the first part of my X. So as long as this is a square format, as well as my reference material and final board, I'll be okay. So the aspect ratio has to be the same. So these are both squares. Then I'm going to create my first line of the X from corner to corner. Oh, it looks like my pen is running out a little bit here, so I'll just go back over it. I want to make sure that I go right across the photo here and get that first X in, which is going to go right across the whole center of the photo. Turning it, again, drawing another line from corner to corner. That's the basis of my X grid. Next, after I've done this and make sure that it goes in, I'm going to do a T shape. I'm going to switch pens here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line across and up and down. So I'm going to have the X first, and then I'm going to find the center point here. I'm going to make a little mark at the bottom, and then I'm going to draw from that dot through the center of the X. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the vertical edge as well. Again, draw from that dot through the center of the X all the way across. The last step of the X grid then is to create an X in each of the 4 quadrants. So I just need one extra half to make up the X, which is essentially going to create a diamond from top to bottom, to left to right. So now all 4 corners have an X in them. And I like using this X grid because while I could create a standard square grid with just a bunch of blocks, that tends to be stiff when you do it. Most people are very literal on tracing from one square to the square on their canvas or board. And I want this to still feel painterly and not too stiff. I don't want it to be a perfect carbon copy of the photograph. So if that's what you want, maybe a standard grid would work for you, but the X grid works really well if you don't want to be super, super perfect. You just want to get the placement of everything where you want it to be. Now I'm working on this little 6x6 board and it's already got the X grid on it. So now I'm ready to draw. Now I could draw with a water-soluble pencil or chalk pastel or even paint, whatever works for you. I'm just going to use a water-soluble pencil here. And I want to get in the major elements. While I might not paint them in detail at the beginning, I just want to know where they're going to go. So I've got my little surfer there. My horizon line goes right through the 2 X's on the bottom half of my grid. And there's a little wall there, so I'm going to create the wall. And then above the wall, you see some trees and some palm trees. And there's some little cars and stuff too, but I can put the hint of those in. I'm going to move the clouds to be just a little bit farther to the left, maybe a little more centered over my sunset area. And now what I'm going to do is just kind of loosely put in where I want to have the big trees. So I'm going to put in just some general marks of where they're going to go. First, this little dot I drew is going to be the rough area of where the sun is going to set. So I have an idea of where I want to crop around with these trees. So I'm going to put them in. These are my loose Dr. Seuss style palm trees. I don't need to do all the detail. I can do that with paint later. And then there are these other go dog go trees here that are really popular in Hawaii. I love these. They have very low branches that go out in a very long umbrella type shape. All right, so basic drawing, not much going on here, just the general idea of where everything is, with the sunset being right in between here, right behind the clouds. So that's really going to be hidden. We're just going to see the glow around those clouds. Now I'm going to start laying out my color. I have what I like to call my Desert Island palette. So I'm going to start with my titanium white. Make sure you put out a nice gob of paint that's at least a quarter in size, like a quarter coin. Then I'm going to put out my cadmium yellow light. Next, I'm going to do my quinacridone rose. These are all M gram paints. And this quinacridone rose, you can also use alizarin crimson or quinacridone rose or red. Next, I'm going to put out my burnt umber and then my ultramarine blue. So these are the basic colors that I'm going to use for this palette. And typically what I'll like to do is start by using my palette knife. I'll drag down a bunch of blue and a little bit of brown and mix them together for my black. So this is my mix for a black. I like it because it allows me to shift the color temperature by adding more brown for a warmer value and more blue for a cooler color. So I'm just going to make sure I wipe off my palette knife after I use it so it stays clean for the next time I need it. And I'm going to start with my Filbert brush, I believe. Let me see which one I'm going to grab here. Yeah, I think that's right. The smaller Filbert. I'm just going to load it up with paint. There's no water on this brush, especially working on a board. The color is going to be a little more translucent. And I'm just going to rough in the darks of the shapes without any worry about detail. I'll go in with the background and carve around it a little bit later. But I'm just going to start by putting in my darks where I see them. So these background bushes, this wall here. Just grabbing more paint as necessary to help it flow. And it's okay if it skips across the canvas and it's not perfect. Don't worry about it. Really, what I want to do is I just want to cover up some of these dark areas, and then I'll go over them again with paint later. So putting in these little palm trees are just going to be general marks, just giving me this kind of, I don't know, almost like a cotton ball shape in some ways. And then the big umbrella trees over here. I don't know what these are called. I'm so sorry. There's probably folks out there that know the correct terms of these trees. After I put in the blacks here, I'm going to go ahead and put another layer on top. So right now I'm just putting in kind of the hint of some of maybe the cars on the top section here. And a couple other trees in the distance, maybe. Just give it a little complexity so it's not too static. And then I'm going to load up the brush with more paint and just go over top here, starting at the beginning and just again adding another layer. Just to make sure it's as opaque as it's going to be. It doesn't need to be super solidly opaque. It's okay if it's a little bit translucent. With my darks, I don't mind if there's a little bit of brushwork that can be seen in them. It doesn't have to be super opaque, but I'm just going to clean it up as best I can here. Yep, just kind of feathering the brush along. And then on this wall, I'm actually going to do an up and down stroke just to add some texture to it that's a little different than the trees. And maybe I'll take this same brush and just put in the hint of where this little guy's going to be. I'm going to paint over him later with some of the watercolors, but I just want to make sure that I don't forget where I want him to be. So I'm going to keep him down there in the middle of that left half of the X, the bottom left hand of the X of the bottom right hand quadrant. All right, so now that I've got the darks in there, I'm going to start mixing some of my colors for the sky. And the first thing I'm going to notice, if you look at the sky photo here, we're going to start with a bluish color up in the top right, and it's going to get a little bit more orangey as we go down towards the sun, and then where the sun is behind the clouds, it's going to be bright yellow. And then the clouds themselves are going to be kind of a bluish purple color. So I'm going to start by mixing my blue. I've mixed a little bit of brown in it. It's got to be quite light. This is going to be a study in pastel. So lots of white, very little bit of brown, or sorry, a little bit of blue, very tiny bit of brown. But I don't think that's where I want to go. I think what I need to do is mix a nice big batch of orange. Now that's going to be mostly yellow with a little bit of red. It's not going to take much red to darken up this orange. I'm going to add a touch of this orange to my blue. Now, because blue and orange are opposite on the color wheel, the orange is really going to help dull down that blue a little bit. And that's going to get me closer to where I want to be, I believe. So looking at it, it's going to gray down my blue, but it's not gray dull. It's gray kind of like warm and full of life because it's got that orange in it. I'm going to go to my large flat brush, and I'm going to go up here in the top right-hand corner and use this grayish blue up in this top right-hand corner. And maybe I'll extend it across the top a little bit more too. And as I start moving down towards the sun, I'm going to start adding a little bit more orange to the color. Because the orange is darker than this color that I'd mixed, I've got to add a little bit of white in as well. So I want all of these colors in the sky to be lighter and lighter as we go down, adding a little bit more orange as I go. So you start to see that gray warm up a little bit. It becomes kind of a warmish orangey gray. And I'm just going to continue to add more of the white and the orange to it. Now I'm going to mix a bigger batch of this with my palette knife. It was okay to mix it with my brush where I was just kind of blending it in as I went, but now I'm going to mix a bigger batch of it because I'm going to get closer to my sun, and I might have to start carving a little bit around some of these trees. So anytime I come into the other gray, if it's still wet, I can just work wet into wet and make it look nice and soft. But if it's dry, you'll have to dry brush it. And that's where you just have very little paint on the brush. You go from edge to edge and you just softly kiss the paint on top just to kind of blend it in as you go along. And I'm just kind of smoothing it out as I go. I'm going to go right around some of these trees, and then I'm going to get a smaller brush to add more detail. So I'm just going to paint the largest amount of area, going farther down than I need to, so that I get a nice smooth transition up there in the sky. I'll worry about those clouds a little later. Now I'm going to grab a smaller brush, and I'm going to start carving out around my palm trees. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going to go in and I'm going to create just the general form of a palm tree. So the palm trees, well, and let's start here with this little umbrella bush. It's just going to be a little bit bumpy around the edges. Add extra paint, and again, dry brush it in to whatever you had before so it looks like it really belongs. With these palm trees, I'm just cutting in these little triangles of color, and then in places adding maybe a few little hairy strokes on the bottom of those little lines, little dots and dabs towards the center. And again, adding another layer as needed to cover any of the black that's underneath. Maybe some holes inside the tree. This umbrella tree has a few holes poking out, so I make sure I get it nice and thick and just add a few little dots and dabs around the edges and in the center. And then I'm going to come back to these palm trees. Again, I'm going to go in little triangles and then maybe little wedges with little lines up into them to create the hint of a palm tree's palm fronds. So again, I'm just kind of looking at the photo and seeing what do I need to do to create the impression of a palm tree. And I'm painting the negatives. And I'm going to do the same thing around these other palm trees as well. And then I'll get lighter and lighter, getting a little thicker where I really want the paint to cover. Don't be afraid to add a nice thick gob of paint here and there to really cover up some of that black underneath. And it's okay if some of the black shows through. Now, as I mix colors, I need to clean off that brush by dipping it in the water, wiping it off. And again, I'm going to lighten my color by adding more of my orange to it, maybe a little bit more yellow, adding some white as well to lighten it up. So we're getting a little bit more clean and brighter in the orangey tones as we get towards that bottom center area. Wipe off your palette knife. And then let's go back to the small filbert and use that to get some of the bigger areas around the trees. And then we'll go back to our round brush for the trees. Again, I'm going to dry brush by holding the brush kind of perpendicular to the canvas so that I'm not carving out the paint, especially if it's wet, but just kind of kissing the canvas with this color. And I'm really going to focus here in this area around where the light is going to be the brightest, which is in this hole here. And then again, dry brushing it into what was there before, just to soften it as it touches all these other values of orangey blues. And then I'll clean off that brush a bit and go back to my round brush to again go in and carve around my palm trees. So again, one more time, I'm just going to look at the palm tree and kind of see, okay, roughly what kind of shapes am I seeing, and try to mimic them. And then don't stress out about it too much because you can go back into it as needed. So, take your time and look at the negative space. Negative space drawing and painting can be really powerful. And a lot of times when you have light coming through trees like this, you'll see the trees almost glowing with oranges and reds where the light is hitting it. We don't have that effect in this photo because the sun is completely hidden by the clouds. All you're seeing is glow coming from above and below the clouds. So we don't get that orangey impact of glow around the tree, so you don't need to worry about that here. Although you could probably artificially add it in if you wanted to, and it adds a really nice kind of a glow of light. But I'm going to leave all my palm trees just black here, and I'm just going to paint the light as coming out from behind clouds. So I'm just going to go in and around my palm tree, carving out the stems, or the trunks, I suppose I should say. And just dots and dabs. I'm just, again, kind of looking at the photo to see where I see them. Now that back cloud that's hiding the sunlight, I'm going to paint that on top of this orange. I'm not going to let that stress me out right now. I'm just going to go ahead and put the orange in, and I'll come back to that cloud later. I'm just going to focus right now on getting these palm trees kind of put in as I see them. And then I'll focus on the clouds afterwards. So every time, now and then you see my brush stop moving. And that's because I'm thinking, I'm looking at my reference photo constantly and evaluating, where do I need to put my next brush stroke? What kind of shape do I need to make to approximate the light coming through the trees to make it look like it might be a palm tree. Having a smooth surface like this board really helps get smooth textures in my blends and also a little more detail than if I had a small canvas. The weave of the canvas can get in the way, and that's why I like to have a board for little paintings. I just went too far with my orange, so I just wiped it off, and then I'll just continue going around. I'm just going to make sure I go really skinny on the trunks of these palm trees. So really just carving out in between. Just go up. I kind of see these little kind of dark hairs at the base of some of these palm trees. Like you can see where there's probably some coconuts or whatever I don't even think these palm trees have coconut. Do they? I think they do have coconut, some of them. But they also have a lot of hair down at the bottom of those palm trees. What looks like hair. I'm sure there's going to be some horticulturalists out here who would know what these all are, and I don't. Most of my focus has been on art, so I didn't learn it. So I apologize to anybody who knows these proper terms. So just looking at the photo again, trying to think, okay, roughly what kind of shapes do I want to make in here and where, and just throwing them in. And then again, filling the rest of the space. And then anywhere I need to go over it again, if I've, going over a dark area, but it's showing through, I can go back over it with thicker paint a little bit later and scoop it up onto it and then paint right back over it. I don't mind some translucency, but for the most part, I want to make sure what I've carved out, I want to keep carved out. Okay. I'm going to clean off that brush, wipe it off really well on my paper towel. Every time I change colors, I clean it off in my paper towel, but I make sure it's really dry afterwards. I don't want any water added to the color. All right, I'm going to go in here with yellow and more of my orange color, just pure yellow and red, and create a little bit more of a vibrant color for the bottom part of the clouds. So I see underneath the clouds, there's a much more vibrant orange along the bottom horizon line. So I'm just going to go in and paint that in right now. Again, this is kind of like a little distant tree in the distance. So I'm just going to go in and carve around some of these dark values just to kind of create the impression of these distant trees as well. And then the underside of that bushy tree. And then I'm going to get a little bit lighter and maybe add a little tiny bit of my blue and red just to make it a little bit duller as it goes off to the distance. So not lighter, pardon me, a little bit darker, but more dull, not as vibrant. So a little bit of that blue poking through. Oh, and it looks like I just sprinkled some water on there when I cleaned my brush and pulled it out. Do not touch those dots. Let them air dry. If I tried to clean up any dots of water, what would happen is I would actually end up carving little white dots through to the canvas. So don't worry about that. Just leave them. Let them dry on their own. And I'm just going to continue to go in here on both sides of that sunset, adding some of that duller and brighter orange wherever I think it needs to go. Again, just carving out spaces in between some of these trees. Wiping off the brush or cleaning it off in the water in between each color mix as needed. And this time I'm going to try and be more careful about not splashing any water. So I'm going to go back to my vibrant orange. Oops, I added a little too much of that reddish color. I'm going to wipe that off with my paper towel rather than just trying to cover it up. I'm just going to use my finger and wipe off the worst of it and then go back over it here. So I just cleaned off a little bit of my cover that I had over the bottom part of that palm tree. So it's a little bit of more vibrant orangey color, a little too dark, I think. I need to get a little lighter with some more white. So it's my orange with a little more white and a little more yellow in it. So it's a little bit more vibrant. And I want to cover up some of these areas, so I got to put thick paint down and then I better leave it. And then go down and around the areas where I know my sun is going to peek out and be really vibrant eventually. And I'll just dry brush over some of this peach from my head before, just to kind of blend it in with everything that's already there. And again, just carving out around the bottom half of this tree now too. And then dry brushing into that brighter orange to the right of that little tree. Cleaning off my brush, wiping it off on my paper towel. I'm going to mix a bigger batch of color now. I'm going to take a purple mix that's red and blue, and I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it. The yellow is going to help diffuse the purple. So yellow and purple are opposite on the color wheel as well. So they're going to dull each other down. Now I'm trying to create the color for the clouds, but right now, and I'm adding a little orange of it in it here, I've got a little too much red. It needs to be more bluish than that. So I'm going to add some more blue to this mix. It's a little too dark still, I think, so I'm going to add some white to it. And I'm going to take my palette knife and hold it up against my photograph to see where I'm at. I need it to be a little bit more yellowy orange. So I'm going to take some of my dull orange. Again, I'm going to hold it up and assess. And I think I'm getting a little bit closer to where I need to be now. Going back to my small round brush, I'm going to take this color and I'm just going to start painting in where I see my cloud, the darker areas of my cloud. So I really see it along here underneath these trees and poking out in between them here and there too. And I'm going to keep this cloud the way that I see it, which is fairly flat along the bottom edge. Not perfect, but fairly flat along the bottom edge with a little bit of a dry brush edge above the orange. And then maybe the top area, I'll have it be a little bit more textured, a little bit more of a shape. Go right around the trees like I did before, and then again, kind of dry brush horizontally on the bottom side of that cloud. And then again over here on the left side as well. Again, this top edge, I can dry brush around the top or bottom of it just to create like that nice soft edge. Now, as I get closer to the light, the color is going to get a little lighter. Let's try a little bit of yellow and see what we think. Looking at my photo, I didn't compare it, and I don't think this is right. I'm going to put a little bit of it here and there on the top half of this cloud, just to lighten up the top half of this cloud. I think it works up here, but I don't think it works where my light is going to be covered by the sun. I think I need more pinkish tone in this area here. This is, when I see it against this vibrant orange, it's just looking kind of dull and greenish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some red, mix it in with this kind of purpley yellowy mix, and then I have to lighten it with some white. I'm going to hold it up and check it, my work. Add a little bit more white to lighten it a little bit more. Maybe a little yellow, just to warm it up. And I think this is going to be a better version. It's a very subtle change from the purple to this pinky tone. But when it goes on top of this yellow area where the sun is going to poke out, I think it works a lot better. So again, the bottom half, I'm just going to keep fairly level and a little bit dry brushed in places. And the top part, I can have a little bit more texture and have it be a little more scalloped. And dry brush it as well, as if there's little streams of cloud that are kind of coming out here and there above the sunset. Because you never see clouds as one perfect entity. They've got little wisps that come away from them here and there too. Go back to my purple and make sure that I get everything as I need it to be. I'm going to make it a little taller on this side. Go back into this bottom half here at the end on the right. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Clean off your brush. Now I'm going to go to my solid yellow, and right above and below where the sunset is, I see that just pure cadmium yellow light. It's really nice and clean and light and vibrant. There's no white here, but maybe I'll add a tiny bit of white to my yellow and make it even more vibrant right where it hits that cloud. I got to go back to some of these orangey areas and put another layer in here where it kind of got away from me a little bit. I wasn't able to cover very well on the first go round, so it needed a second coat to cover up a little bit better. So just adding more layers to keep that bottom part of that sunset nice and vibrant. Clean off my brush. Now I'm going to take the white and a little bit of yellow. So a really nice, clean, bright, very warm or cool yellow just plopped in above and below that cloud where the light is coming from. All right, going back to my sky blue and a little bit of this orange tone. If I have to mix a little bit more, I will. Add a little bit of white to keep the color just where I need it to be. And I'm going to go back into some of these holes that I've carved. I'm going to add another layer and just make sure that I go back and refine. It's these holes, these negative spaces, that really help pull it together and read as trees. So I really want to make sure I get those in there. I'm using the same color I had, or roughly the same colors I had in the sky behind it. I'm just trying to get as close as I can without worried about being perfect. Just want to give the hint of something going on. Your brain will fill it in. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Just give the hint of what's happening. All right, let's clean off those brushes now. While we let this sky all dry a little bit, let's start mixing some of the color for the water. And I think this purple color that I had used for the clouds, I think I'm going to use that in the water as well. I'm just holding that up now to my photograph to check and see. And yes, I think I'm going to need that. So I'm going to move that aside. I might want to mix a bigger batch of it, but I see some of that purpley tone that was in the clouds in the water as well. I'm also going to need to make sure I still have enough of my orange because I want to start by painting the reflected light in the water. So I'm going to use that small filbert, clean it off, dry off all the water. And I'm going to start with some of the oranges. So I'm going to go underneath where I see the oranges. Oh, actually, you know what? I grabbed my flat brush, not my filbert. And I'm just going to pull the lines going down. Now, if I'm not able to cover some of my darker areas, I can always go back in a little bit later and add another layer on top. So I'm just going to start my first layer by going in and just looking at what I see happening in the reflections. And I see some really yellow light coming in the very center underneath that sunset. And then beside it are really some nice oranges. And then I've got some of those really kind of more dulled down peachy tones. So that's yellow and white, yellow and red with a little bit of blue and a little bit of white mixed in. And I might need to add a little bit more white, but I'm going to do another layer on top here to really cover that black. So as I'm moving towards my little surfer dude, I'm going to paint right over him to start, and I'll bring him back in later. I will see him through this paint that I'm going to put in here, so it's all good. So I'm going to add some white to my color here, that peachy color. As I'm going towards the right, I'm going to just allow some of that peach to come in. I'm going to keep everything in an up and down motion, the reflections all coming in an up and down motion. I will add some horizontal strokes a little bit later with some of the dark reflections and some of the sky reflections as well that are sitting on top of the water. So I'm trying to cover up some of this black here, and I'm struggling because the paint is still wet. So if this happens, you have to lay down thick paint and just let it be, or wait till it dries and then put another layer over top. So either way. Now, as I move towards the right, I'm going to start adding more and more of this blue to that orangey mix. Just like I have in the sky, I start to get a little bit more of the orange and the blue mixed together all the way to the right. I just want a combination of the colors that you see in the sky down here in the ground. It's not a perfect copy of what's going on above it, but it's in roughly the right areas, the same areas roughly. And then just little streaks of bright color shining through here and there. Just these up and down strokes, and now I need to let that dry. I can go back over that black a little bit later and play with that a little bit more. But for now, what I really want to do is I want to make sure that I leave that bottom area to dry. So if you need to step away and grab a snack and then come back to it, you can do that. I'm going to start going back to my palm trees. So I'm going back to my black, and I'm going to use my script liner brush, and I'm going to go back in and start to add a little bit more detail. So including some of these branches of this big go dog go tree. I love these trunks and branches, how wide they spread. I'm exaggerating that effect here a little bit because I made mine a little bit lower to the ground. And I'm using that script liner brush. It's all about pressure. The harder you push, the bigger that stroke is going to be. The lighter that you push, if you push very lightly, you get a very thin stroke. And then, of course, I'm going to put in my palm trees, which have these awesome, really wonky trunks that kind of curve and move, warped over time. Maybe go in and reinforce some of my palm trees' palm fronds as well, just making sure that I get in all the shapes that I want to. So in the end, it becomes kind of a combination of a negative space and positive space painting. So for the most part, the way I like to paint palm fronds is just to paint them coming out and then having a bunch of little hairs coming down. At the very top, a lot of times, you'll see it bend sideways, or you'll see just a bunch of little hairs at the top going straight up and down. That's typically what I see. But, just take a look for yourself and try to abbreviate it so it's not too precise or perfect, but just gives you the impression of a palm tree. Because in the end, that's really what it comes down to. Is it plausible as a palm tree? So little strokes. I flick the brush kind of up, off, flick, flick, like a plane coming off the runway. And that allows me to create these nice little strokes. Because that pressure as the plane comes up off the runway, or the brush, as it comes up off the canvas or board, gets thinner as you flick it. So it allows you to create these tiny little hairs. And this little script liner brush is perfect for that. Just going to add a few little details to the bottom of some of these trees here too. A few other little distant palm trees in the distance. And reinforce some of these ones as well, where they kind of got lost a little bit. This one was kind of tall and rounded, although actually it did kind of look like that in the photo too. It is a little tall, but I didn't quite put in the palm fronds the way I wanted them to go. So I'm going to fix some of those up. Just giving it a little, it kind of looks like a spider. Let's get rid of some of that spidery look. Maybe we'll have one kind of extend out a little bit farther here. Put a little bit of detail here too, just some little dots and dabs along the bottom edges and next to some of these little ones. Make little lines as though there's more trunks off in the distance to other trees. I'm going to fill in some of the space here where it was white of the canvas. And then I might even put another palm tree in this top left edge. Maybe just have a little bit of it showing so it's not like I'm trying to avoid the left edge of my canvas. I see sometimes folks won't put anything going off the right or the left edges, and like they're avoiding the edges of the paper or the canvas. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to put this little guy here just so I don't avoid that edge too much. Maybe the hint of something else in the background there. All right, I'm going to clean that little brush off, and I'm going to go back to my orange. And I'm starting to lose some color here, but I'm just going to go back in with my orange and pop in some more little dots and dabs, holes into these trees on the left-hand side too, to make sure that it's not too dark and boring, but give kind of that hint of something interesting going on. And even in all these cars, so all this texture along this bottom edge here, that's like cars. I'm going to put in a few highlights of like some of the tops and the headlights or the windshields that are kind of reflecting some of the light through the windows. I'll put those in there too. And it could be anything. It could be houses from afar. It doesn't even really matter. It's just the shapes that I see, and I think they're good shapes. So it looks like I messed up this bottom right-hand corner with my hand. So I'm going to go back in with some of my blues and my oranges and my whites and just go right over it again and just make sure I get it. So it's not fingerprinted the way I did it. And don't put your hands on your work. And then I can go back in and again reestablish some of this dark line of this wall above the water. And if it's dry brushed and messy, I actually kind of like that look. I kind of like it being a little soft on that right-hand edge. In fact, I wish I had done it on the left edge. I could still go back over it and do a little bit more of dry brush on the left edge if I wanted to, but I think that actually adds something there. Okay, let's go on. Now we're still letting that water area dry, so I need that to be really dry before I go on, but I want to put in some of those clouds in the top half of the sky. So what I want to do is I want to start mixing some of the colors that I need up there. I'm going to take my orange and some white, and I'm going to start by putting in the shapes of the clouds to begin with, and then I'll add some more detail to them. So I know I'm going to want them to be kind of centered over my sunset here. And I like the way that they have these kind of big fluffy bits and then also some really kind of wispy bits. And what I like to do with clouds, even though the photo doesn't show this too much, I like to keep them fairly horizontal oriented. So they're all kind of, in the same trajectory on the X plane. I think it's the X plane, not the Y plane. So horizontally. And I'm going to create some wispy bits. And I'm using an up and down stroke, allowing the filbert brush to kind of dictate this nice, soft, wispy top and a slightly flatter bottom, which I do see in these as well. So I'm going to put them in, and then I'm going to start, I need to put out a little more blue so I can start adding some of the darker values. I'm going to mix kind of a dark brownish or purple. So I'm going to start with purple, which is blue and red mixed together. Then I'm going to add some white to lighten it and some yellow to dull it. So adding that mix of color. Let's see where we're at. I think that's quite dark. Let's lighten that up just a bit. Okay, and then I'm going to go into the top half of these clouds, since they're underlit, the light is coming from below. So the darker bits where they're more dense is on the top half. And I don't see too much of it in these bottom clouds, but more of it in the top clouds. Now, I'll start lightening my color. So I'm going to use some white and yellow and mix it into this color with a little bit more of the red so it doesn't go too greenish. And I'm going to start warming up the bottom half of these purpley tones. So it becomes kind of like a warm orangey brownish color, adding more yellow and white to that color. And again, go into the bottom of it. Actually, let's make that a little bit more orangey. So add a little bit of red to it too. I want this to be a nice warm, kind of an orangey tone that's still a little darker and duller than what I had before. And I'm just going to go around and, of course, from below into the purples to really give me that nice glow. I'm going to create some more little trailers with this color here. And then add my darker values to these bottom clouds. Wiping off my brush in between after washing it in water. Let's add some more white and pure orange this time. Let's get a little bit more pure and more yellowy. Every time I add the white, I'm going to add some yellow too to make sure it's nice and bright. And I'm going to go around the bottom edges and up into these big bulbous areas where I see the light. And again, I'm still kind of dabbing down. So I'm pushing the brush downward or making little dots and staying with that kind of horizontal format to create this nice light in these clouds. And then maybe a few more wispy bits here and there on their own. So I'm just lightening up the bottom halves of all these clouds and in places dry brushing some little wispy bits into the sky. I'm going to add a little bit more red and white to this to make it a little bit more peachy as I go towards the outer edges, kind of mimicking what I've got down below as well, where it's more yellowy towards the center and maybe got a little bit of a more pinky or peachy tone as it gets farther away to the right or the left of that sunlight. A few more wisps in my sky with a little bit of a soft dry brush into that sky. And always a little bit of that horizontal format. And that's probably just me. I just think I see that. Going back to my white and yellow mixture for the bottom for a really nice, vibrant glow of light coming from below. Really kissing the bottom edges of these clouds. And a little bit, ooh, that's a little too dark. I was going to get a little darker with my peachy tones farther out, but I'm not going to get quite that dark. But I'll leave some of that reddish tone just to be kind of a little bit darker on those outer edges. Here and there, as it was getting farther away from the light, the clouds tend to get darker usually. So I'm exaggerating that effect from the photo. I mean, in the photo, they're pretty light all the way around, but I'm really exaggerating that look. Now that my ground is a little bit more dried, I'm going to go back in and add another layer on top of the areas where I really wanted to cover up some of the darks. And make sure that my light is really vibrant underneath that sun. And if I go back into my orange to cover up some of the black that's not that I don't want to be there, I need to make sure I cover that up too. And in an area that I haven't retouched, I'm going to start to put in the general idea of my little surfer. So he's got an arm out, his body comes down on an angle, You only see part of the surfboard, and then behind him, I'm going to dry brush just some light, dark shadow, behind him. His head is a little bit of almost a square, actually. I think I need to square that off a little bit more. This is a pond where a lot of kids were practicing on surfboards. And I'm just using the Simply Simmons round brush, but you can move to that script liner as well, because that will really help you get into little areas a little easier. So I want to square off his head a little bit more than what I had it. I had it too round. And now I'm going to just do a little bit more detail and dry brush towards the back, and maybe start to put in the hint of where some of those reflections in the waters will go. I'm just doing some horizontal strokes underneath of him right now, but I'll go back into it with color later too. All right, I'm going to clean that off, and I'm going to go into my orange and yellow, that yellowy orange, and I may just put a little glint of light along the top of his shoulder and his head, but I might refine that a little bit more later. So just across the top of its head, maybe across the top of the board too. All right, I'm going to clean that off, and now I need all of this to be super dry before I'd start doing a lot of real detail. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into the ground, into the water, and reflect some of the trees and the dark spots. So I'm going to take my mix of blue and brown, add more brown and a little bit of red, so it's not super black. I'm going to go below these trees here on the left. I noticed like the left-hand side is darker than on the right, so I'm just going to do a few lines where I see some of the darks. And over here on the right, I'm going to lighten this up a little bit. I'm going to add some white. Now it's showing as purple, so I'm just going to add a little bit more brown to it. I'm just going to add some of the darks underneath here where I see them. And I'm just dry brushing it. It's nice and messy going across. It's not a perfect, precise line. I'm going to mix a little bit of orange with some of this brown, and then go to the right as well and do a little bit. I see it's quite a bit lighter here. And going back to some of that darker color, and just make sure I get it in, again, dry brushing on top of where it needs to be. And then I'm going to put this aside, and I'm going to take a break and let this dry completely so I can dry brush with this cloud color here. Maybe while I'm waiting for it to dry too, I'll mix up some more of that color. So it's purple with yellow and then white to lighten. So I'm going to start by mixing the red and the blue together, add some yellow to it and some white, and I'm going to start mixing that all together, and then I'm going to adjust. So as I look at my color right now, it's got a little too much blue in it. It needs to be a little bit warmer, so I'm going to add a little bit more red. I'm going to lighten it up a little bit more by adding some white, and I'm always going to compare it to what I have beside it. So it's still too dark. I'm going to have to lighten it up some more. I'm going to mix it up real well. I'm going to take all of this white and mix it in, and then see where I'm at. Let's hold this up maybe to the photo and see. Off camera here, I've got my photo and I'm just holding it up to check it out, and it's looking pretty close. I'm going to maybe pre-mix again some of these oranges and the sky colors, because I'm going to need those to go in there too. So I've got my yellow and my red, mostly yellow, a little bit of red. Oh, it looks like I need to put out some more white. You really go through the white when you have a lot of these pastel colors. I'm going to go back and mix another bit of yellow and red and add some white, because I want to get a peachy tone. I've got quite a bit of red in that mix. I'm going to add more white. And I'm just going to if I'm getting too big with my color mixes and I don't want to go through all my white, I'm just going to pull some away from that and not mix it into the biggest batch, but pull some of it that I've already mixed away. I'm going to add more yellow and white to make this more warm and light at the same time. So again, I'm looking for the colors that I have in my sky or in my water, because I'm going to go back and forth over top of some of those dark bits with some horizontal strokes now. So the first strokes were straight up and down. These strokes are now going to be more horizontal. I'm going to take some blue and I'm going to add my orange to it, some of the color that I had mixed from before. Add some red and yellow. So orange mixed with my blue, still too much of the yellow. I'm going to lighten it up here and add more red, because if the color's green, then you know there's too much yellow. We need some more red in there. I'm trying to get to roughly the same color I have in the bottom right half of the water. I'm going to put a little more white out and add it, just pulling a little bit down, because that way I don't have to mix as much white in. Take more yellow. And maybe some more red, because I want to lean it a little bit warmer. I'm getting much closer now. I take some of that orange and some of that yellow again. And now I'm feeling like I'm almost there. All right, I'm going to clean off my brushes, make sure they're really dry before I get started on this. And I'm going to use my Simply Simmons brush. I'm going to start with my oranges and go over here. And I'm just going to go in really wide zigzags or little horizontal lines over top of some of those dark lines that I had done before. And I can do dots and dabs. I can do lines. I can do it however I want to do it. I just want to create some horizontal strokes that feel quite imperfect. And just kind of like little waves in the water going across. So I'm going back and forth with some of my colors. I've still got the sky color that I'm going to put in above it a little bit later. I got to put a little more yellow. I'm going to put it down here because I want to take my orange and add more yellow to it. So I'm just going to put a little yellow right beside that orange color. And I'm also going to do some of these lines right over top of my existing area. So I have the down strokes from before, but I also then have some of these horizontal strokes going across too, just to break up the water. So little bits here and there. They don't have to be perfect solid lines. They can be little dashes in places, little dabs of highlight. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Everywhere I have these reflected little light and shadow. And then as I go over towards my guy, I'm going to go around my little guy. I'm going to start going into some of this kind of greeny orange color, mixing the two in together. To go right over all of these shadows. And again, breaking it up into water.
No.
So horizontal strokes all the way across. All right, going back to my filbert brush, clean it off, wipe it off really well. And I'm going to go now into my purple, which again is the same color I used in the clouds in the sky. And I'm going to dry brush across wherever I see the water is disturbed. And maybe I'll add a little more white to this, especially in a few places where let some of that white come through. So this is where the water is disturbed. It's really reflecting some of the color of the clouds and of the sky, but also of the water itself a little bit is coming through there. And then behind my little guy, he's disturbing the water because he's surfing in there. So behind him in a triangle shape, you're also going to see some of the same color. And then I'll add a little bits of it here and there throughout the bottom too. And maybe a few strands of it here and there. Oops, that was a little bit darker value of the purple there. So I'm going to get a little bit lighter. Now, whether you add as much purple as I am or not, that's kind of up to you. I'm just adding a little bit more of it to help me break up some of that water. I think that it helps to kind of break up some of that orange so it doesn't look too perfect. But if you want to do a perfect rendition of what you're seeing, please go for it. Don't let me stop you. You do what works best for you. Now I'm going to go back in again and just darken up a few areas. This left side here, I need a little bit more of the dark coming in. Under my little guy, I'm going to have him go all the way down with some light. And maybe let's lighten it up a little bit here and add some more red again. And again, just kind of come in here and make sure I get those horizontal lines in. Nice and dry brush, so it's a little bit messy, look, not too perfect, because in the water there is texture there. And so the skipping of that dry brush effect, I think, kind of helps give me that water look. Whereas in my sky, I've got it pretty smooth. I'm going to go back to that peachy orange color, and I'm going to go around my little guy just to brighten up around him. Even though in the photo it isn't as bright around his little body, I'm going to make it a little brighter. So I dry brush around it, add some of those colors here and there, just to make sure that it really pops him out. Because an area of high contrast is really going to draw the eye. Again, I'm going to go back in and really add that nice bright highlight along the top of his body and his surfboard to really catch the light a little bit more. Now I can always make that highlight a little thinner if I want to by going back into the black with my little brush. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into some red and brown, and I'm just going to add a really nice warm red and brown tone above the black on his body. Because he doesn't have a shirt on and his skin is catching the light. His hair is really dark, so that I'm going to leave that black, but just add a little hint of the red on top of his body, just to kind of give it a glow. And because his body's wet too, it would potentially do that, so. A little bit more of that trail behind him with that same color. Clean off all my brushes really well while I decide what else I want to put in here. Really going to go in this bottom right hand corner and just kind of dull it out a little bit more with this purple. Still purple. And then I sit back and evaluate and take a look. Where else do I need to edit? Maybe I'll take this purple and go back into those cars again and add some more of those little highlights and dots and dabs to show reflection off of these areas back here. Whether it's a bunch of cars or buildings or whatever it might be, it just gives a little level of complexity to add some of that, I think. Like there's things that are catching the light. And they are, of course. All right, I'm going to go to my red and brown mixture and add some blue and a little bit of white. I'm basically creating kind of a dark brownish purple color with some red mixed in. And all I'm going to do is create a nice dark haze that's a little warmer and a little lighter than the black to the front part of this this wall. Almost like it's getting some reflected light from the water back up onto it. So I'm adding a little bit more red to this color, especially in the front center area under the light, where it's casting maybe a little bit of a reflected light. So it's pretty subtle, but I think sometimes those things can add a little extra warmth to the piece. All right, let me see. I'm trying to think of where I'm going to sign the painting and what color. And I was thinking of purple but the whole bottom area is fairly small. It doesn't have a lot of space, so I'm going to clean off my brush. I think I'm going to sign this piece instead in the top right-hand corner. And I think I might use blue because I've got some blue up in that top right-hand corner anyway. So I'm going to put a little more blue out. Let's mix it up with some white. Maybe make it a little darker than what's already there. I'm going to add a touch of water to it. And you saw me spin the brush in one direction just to try and get the thinnest point I can get on this script liner brush that I can to put my signature in. And I sign just by pulling down and creating my signature this way. And I think having the blue up there just amplifies the fact that the sky is blue up in the top right-hand corner. And that's it. I haven't gone into too much hyper detail on this little piece, but if you're working bigger, you can pay more attention to your palm trees and your little guy and really take the time to delve into it.